Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 9, an inquiry into the origin and history of Freemasonry. From an exposition of the mysteries or religious dogmas and customs of the ancient Egyptians, Pythagoreans and Druids. Also an inquiry into the origin, history and purport of Freemasonry by John Fellows, A.M. Chapter 7. An inquiry into the origin and history of Freemasonry. The spirit of innovation had seized all the brethren. No man can give a tolerable account of the origin, history or object of the order, and it appeared to all as a lost or forgotten mystery. The symbols seemed to be equally susceptible of every interpretation, and none of these seemed entitled to any decided preference. Professor Robeson. Proofs of the existence of the Society of Freemasons at certain remote periods, added to the occurrence of events that would naturally tend to create it, will point out its origin with sufficient accuracy for the present inquiry. No regular history of the order is attainable at this time, nor is it essential to our purpose. It is highly probable, as asserted by Dr. Anderson, that many valuable documents relating to the society were destroyed at the revolution of the order in 1717 by some scrupulous brethren for fear that an improper use might be made of them. I shall endeavor to show that the British Druids instituted this society, and the first consideration will be to point out the period when they were in a condition that required a resort to such secret means for the preservation and continuance of their religious rites. We have seen that their open worship was entirely prohibited by the Edict of Canute, who reigned from 1015 to 1035. Within those periods, therefore, this edict was issued, by which the very existence of the Druids in England was put at hazard. It appears that paganism existed at this time not only in England, but in most of the other states of Europe. Dr. Lingard, speaking of Olav, King of Norway, says, "That prince was a zealous Christian, but his religious innovations irritated the jealousy of the pagan priests, and he was murdered in an insurrection of his subjects in 1028. Cut off from their favorite devotional retreat, no means were left them but to devise some mode to evade the scrutinizing eye of the ministers of the law. About the beginning of the 5th century, says Laurie, Theodosius the Great prohibited and almost totally extinguished the pagan theology in the Roman Empire, and the mysteries of Eleusis suffered in the general devastation. It is probable, however, that these mysteries were secretly celebrated in spite of the severe edicts of Theodosius, and that they were partly continued during the Dark Ages, though stripped of their original purity and splendor. We are certain at least that many rites of the pagan religion were performed under the dissembled names of convivial meetings long after the publication of the Emperor's edict. And Pausanias informs us that the mysteries of Ceres subsisted in Athens till the 8th century of the Christian era and were never totally suppressed. A similar course would naturally suggest itself to the Druids, that such a course was adopted and that they fixed on the craft of masonry as a cloak under which to screen their mystic ceremonies and dogmas will, it is believed, appear so evident in the sequel as to leave no room for doubt upon the subject. During the reign of Canute, therefore, it may fairly be presumed the famous Freemason Society was first established. The conquest of England by William, Duke of Normandy, occurred in 1066, and it is highly probable that many of the artisans who were induced by him to emigrate from France into England were initiated into the order of Freemasons, and greatly contributed to raise its fame as an operative Masonic institution. King William, says Dr. Anderson, brought many expert Masons from France. He died in Normandy in 1087. It is probable that many of these Masons were attached to the Druidical religion, as the rites of Druidism are said to have been openly practiced in France, upwards of 100 years after the Edict of Canute prohibiting them in England. The condition and character of the people of England at the time of the conquest is thus portrayed by Guthrie. With regard to the manners of the Anglo-Saxons, we can say little but that they were in general a rude, uncultivated people, ignorant of letters, unskillful in the mechanical arts, untamed to submission under law and government, addicted to intemperance, riot and disorder. Even so late as the time of Canute, they sold their children and kindred into foreign parts. Their best quality was their military courage, which yet was not supported by discipline or conduct. Even the Norman historians, notwithstanding the low state of the arts in their own country, speak of them as barbarous, when they mention the invasion of the Duke of Normandy. Conquest placed the people in a situation to receive slowly from abroad the rudiments of science and cultivation, and to correct their rough and licentious manners. He, William, introduced the Norman laws and language. He built the stone square tower at London, bridled the country with forts, and disarmed the old inhabitants. In short, he attempted every measure possible to obliterate even the traces of the Anglo-Saxon constitution, though at his coronation he took the same oath that had been taken by the ancient Saxon kings. Great advancement, however, in the art of building, it seems, soon followed this event. Dr. Henry, in his History of the Necessary Arts in Britain from 1066 to 1216, says, "Architecture, in all its branches, received as great improvements in this period as agriculture." The truth is that the 12th century may very properly be called the Age of Architecture, in which the rage for building was more violent in England than at any other time. The great and general improvements that were made in the fabrics of houses and churches in the first years of this century are thus described by a contemporary writer. The new cathedrals and innumerable churches that were built in all parts, together with the many magnificent cloisters and monasteries, and other apartments of monks that were then erected, afford a sufficient proof of the great felicity of England in the reign of Henry I. Henry I was the third son of William, and ascended the throne in 1100, only 34 years after the conquest. To enable him to carry on such extensive works in architecture required that his subjects should have been previously instructed by his predecessors. Under the patronage, therefore, of King William, there is the strongest reason to believe the Masonic Society was fostered and protected. And although the principal purpose of the leading members of the institution was the preservation of their religious rights, yet attention was required to be given by them to the ostensible object of the establishment. Through this means, there is no reason to doubt that architecture was improved to a greater extent in England at this time than it would have been but for this adventitious circumstance. The mere craftsman, however, knew nothing of the secret views of his superiors. The symbols made use of in the lodge were unintelligible to him, but he was pleased with the tinsel show of the representations. And when he was found sufficiently intelligent, and was thought worthy to be trusted, he was raised to the sublime degree of Holy Royal Arch, and gained the honorary appellation of Companion. Here, if duly attentive to the symbols and ceremonies, he might make some progress towards discovering the hidden scheme upon which Freemasonry was founded. Laurie observes, the principles of the order were even imported into Scotland, where they continued for many ages in their primitive simplicity, long after they had been extinguished in the continental kingdoms. What those causes were which continued the societies of Freemasons longer in Britain than in other countries, it may not perhaps be easy to determine. But as the fact itself is unquestionably true, it must have arisen either from favorable circumstances in the political state of Britain, which did not exist in the other governments of Europe, or from the superior policy by which the British Masons eluded the suspicions of their enemies, and the superior prudence with which they maintained the primitive simplicity and respectability of the order. In this manner did Freemasonry flourish in Britain, when it was completely abolished in every part of the world. That Freemasonry was introduced into Scotland by those architects who built the Abbey of Kilwinning is manifest, not only from those authentic documents by which the existence of the Kilwinning Lodge has been traced back as far as the end of the 15th century, but by other collateral arguments which amount almost to a demonstration. In every country where the temporal and spiritual jurisdiction of the Pope was acknowledged, there was a continual demand, particularly during the 12th century, for religious structures and consequently for operative Masons, proportional to the piety of the inhabitants and the opulence of their ecclesiastical establishments. And there was no kingdom in Europe where the zeal of the inhabitants for popery was more ardent, where the kings and nobles were more liberal to the clergy, and where of consequence the church was more richly endowed than in Scotland. The church possessed about 1/2 of the property in the kingdom. Robertson's History of Scotland. The demand, therefore, for elegant cathedrals and ingenious artists must have been proportionably greater than in other countries, and that demand could be supplied only from the trading associations on the continent. We are authorized, therefore, to conclude that those numerous and elegant ruins which still adorn the villages of Scotland were erected by foreign masons who introduced into this island the customs of their order. It is a curious fact that in one of those towns where there is an elegant abbey which was built in the 12th century, the author of this history has often heard that it was erected by a company of industrious men who spoke in a foreign language and lived separately from the town's people. And stories are still told about their petty quarrels with the inhabitants. It was probably about this time also that Freemasonry was introduced into England. But whether the English received it from the Scotch Masons at Kilwinning or from other brethren who had arrived from the continent, there is no method of determining. The fraternity in England, however, maintain that St. Alban was the first that brought Masonry to Britain, about the end of the 3rd century, that the brethren received a charter from King Athelstane, and that his brother Edwin summoned all the lodges to meet at York, which formed the first Grand Lodge of England, in 926. But these are merely assertions, not only incapable of proof from authentic history, but inconsistent also with several historical events which rest upon indubitable evidence. In support of these opinions, indeed, it is alleged that no other lodge has laid claim to greater antiquity than that of York, and that its jurisdiction over the other lodges of England has been invariably acknowledged by the whole fraternity. But this argument only proves that York was the birthplace of Freemasonry in England. It brings no additional evidence in support of the improbable stories about St. Alban, Athelstane, and Edwin. If the antiquity of Freemasonry in Britain can be defended only by the forgery of silly and uninteresting stories, it does not deserve to be defended at all. Those who invent and propagate such tales do not surely consider that they bring discredit upon their order by the warmth of their zeal, and that by supporting what is false, they debar thinking men from believing what is true. Mr. Lorry has made it appear very probable that the churches erected in Scotland in the 12th century were built by foreign masons. Indeed, the want of skill in the natives is sufficient evidence of the fact, but this is no proof that they belonged to the Freemason Society. And the dissolution of the trading associations on the continent, of which he speaks as soon as the rage for church building ceased, while Freemasonry held its ground in England, is conclusive that there was no connection between them. But even admitting that the foreign masons who built the Abbey of Kilwinning were Freemasons, the presumption would be that they had been initiated in England. And there is no evidence that the secrets of the society were communicated to the Scotch. They could be of no possible advantage to operative Masons, and the people of Scotland appear to have been thoroughly imbued with popery to embrace them in a religious point of view. Besides, if these foreigners were Freemasons and had admitted into their society a portion of the inhabitants of the places where they were employed, it is not probable that the petty quarrels mentioned by Lorry would have occurred. The case was different in England, where Druidism had been revived by the Danish emigrants after its conquest by that nation. Upon the whole, there is no conclusive evidence that Freemasonry was established in Scotland till after its reorganization in England in 1717. The Mason associations in that country before this period appear to be no other than common trade companies, such as those incorporated in London. They had a chief or grand master with deputies in the different counties, all appointed by the king, though sometimes by consent of the craft. The master was styled the patron, protector, judge, or mister of the Masons of Scotland, and the craft styled themselves free of the masons and hammermen. Lorry cites the following. In the Privy Seal Book of Scotland there is a letter dated at Holyrood House, the 25th of September 1590, and granted by King James VI to Patrick Copeland of Udort, for using and exercising the office of wardenry over the art and craft of masonry, over all the bounds of Aberdeen, Bale, and Kincardine, to have warden and justice courts within the bounds, and there to minister justice. Lorry also observes that in the year 1645, a particular jurisdiction for Masons was established in France. All differences which related to the art of building were decided by particular judges who were called overseers of the art of masonry, and several councillors were appointed for pleading the causes which were referred to their decision. This institution has such a striking resemblance to the warden courts which existed in Scotland in the 16th century that it must have derived its origin from these. In both of them, those causes only were decided which related to masonry, and overseers were chosen in both for bringing these causes to a decision. There is nothing of Freemasonry in all this. There is nothing of Druidism, the very spirit and soul of the order, to be seen in it. There is every reason to believe that Freemasonry was first established in England, and that there it remained till the famous meeting of the Brotherhood at the Apple Tree Tavern in 1717, when it took wing and visited all parts of the civilized world. In fact, there was no cause for its institution in any other country than England, where the Edict of Canute had compelled the Druids to relinquish their religion altogether or practice its rites and ceremonies covertly. As the Druids, says Hutchinson, were a sect of religion peculiar to Gaul and Britain, it may not be improper to cast our eyes on the ceremonies they used. Their antiquity and peculiar station render it probable some of their rites and institutions might be retained, informing the ceremonies of our society. In so modern an era as 1140, they were reduced to a regular body of religious in France and built a college in the city of Orleans. They were heretofore one of the two estates of France to whom were committed the care of providing sacrifices, of prescribing laws for worship, and deciding controversies concerning rights and properties. As, therefore, it does not appear that Druidism at any time was under a positive legal restraint except in England, it may be reasonably inferred that its offspring Freemasonry existed nowhere else till the period above stated. All the brethren on the continent agree in saying that Freemasonry was imported from Great Britain about the beginning of this 18th century and in the form of a mystical society. Robeson, in speaking of Freemasonry in Germany, observes, "Though no man could pretend that he understood the true meaning of Freemasonry, its origin, its history, or its real aim, all saw that the interpretations of its hieroglyphics and the rituals of the new degrees imported from France were quite gratuitous. It appears, therefore, that the safest thing for them was an appeal to the birthplace of Masonry. They sent to London for instructions. There they learned that nothing was acknowledged for genuine unsophisticated Masonry but the 3 degrees, and that the Mother Lodge of London alone could, by her instructions, prevent the most dangerous schisms and innovations. Many lodges, therefore, applied for patents and instructions. Patents were easily made out and most willingly sent to the zealous brethren, and these were thankfully received and paid for, but instruction was not so easy a matter. They afterwards sent a deputation to Old Aberdeen, Scotland, to inquire after the caves where their venerable mysteries were known and their treasures were hid. They had, they thought, merited some confidence, for they had remitted annual contributions to their unknown superiors to the amount of some thousands of dollars. But alas, their ambassadors found the Freemasons of Old Aberdeen ignorant of all this, and equally eager to learn from the ambassadors what was the true origin and meaning of Freemasonry, of which they knew nothing but the simple tale of old Hiram. Mr. Ward, in his Anti-Masonic Review, Volume 1, page 345, quotes the following from a French work entitled Essai sur la franche-maçonnerie by J.L. Laurent, which shows very conclusively that the Freemason Society originated in England. Mr. Laurent says, "Impossible as it is to determine the precise era of the establishment of Freemasonry in Europe, so easy it is to show in what manner and by what means it spread and propagated itself. Many reasons concur to make us believe that the English brought it into Europe, and that they have given it the exterior form and the different names by which we know it at this day. Independent of the historical monuments which prove that long before the 14th century it was known in England, it appears indispensable that in that country of Europe it has been furnished, if I may so express myself, with the form in which it has come to us. There is not a doubt that the names Franche-Maçonnerie and Frères Maçons are purely of English origin. Freemasonry, Freemason, that is to say, maçonnerie libre, macon libre, literally rendered into French, have produced those strange terms, a manner of speaking far enough removed, both from our customs and the genius of our language. For it is certain if what we understand by Freemasonry and Freemasons had received in France, or in any other country besides England, any name whatever, that name could not have had so characteristic a mark of the English tongue. A slight knowledge of the principal languages of Europe, and especially to know that in English the adjective commonly precedes the noun, is enough in order to become convinced that these names have been formed by the genius of the English tongue. After criticizing the Masonic word lodge at some length, he goes on to say, I might further push the investigation of the terms of English etymology peculiar to Freemasonry, did I not fear to enter upon details which I am not permitted to publish. The usages and practices of the lodges in what concerns only the exterior of Freemasonry present some points of resemblance not less striking. And it is this intimate relation with the peculiar character of the English people that I cite in support of my proposition. What is the origin of that wearisome quantity of healths with which the Masonic entertainments were formerly burdened, which have been the occasion of so much sarcasm against Freemasonry, and which good taste has now wisely reformed? Is not this immoderate use of a custom innocent in itself, an image of the too often repeated toast which so much distinguishes English clubs? The love of good cheer, the profusion, the lengthening out of the feast, the intemperate drinking which are contrary to French sobriety, and which reason and decency have long since banished to the taverns of London, to which they legitimately belong, can these have any relation to the object of Masonic fellowship, of which they are at best only a despicable parody? The grossness of these practices, introduced into France with Freemasonry, is too nearly allied to the taste of the English nation not to be attributed to their invention. The nature of the customs connected with Freemasonry, its peculiar name, the most of the words that express the matters which make up its exterior form, are precisely conformed to the taste and peculiar genius of the English, and prove that in England it began to have being as a society. After further argument from the geographical position, free institutions, and melancholy temperament of the English, Laurent adds, all these observations incline us to believe that it is from England Freemasonry comes to us as it exists now, that is to say, dressed in this whimsical fashion which almost entirely disguises it and scarcely permits us to discover it in the precious allegory of the Egyptian philosophy. The allegories of the Egyptian mysteries required to be disguised to prevent the real purport of Masonry's being discovered. The idea of the author that the English first established Freemasonry is very correct but inaccurately expressed. They did not bring it into Europe, they manufactured it themselves at home from what he calls the precious allegory of the Egyptian philosophy. I will now produce such proofs of the long standing of the Society of Freemasons in England as have survived the wreck of time. Examination of a Mason by King Henry VI. One of the documents referred to by Freemasons in proof of their antiquity, and which is considered as more decisive than any other, is a paper said to have been found in the Bodleian Library in 1696, and supposed to have been written in about the year 1436. It purports to be an examination of one of the Brotherhood by King Henry VI. Although there are suspicious circumstances attending this manuscript in regard to its authenticity, yet it appears to possess an internal evidence of genuineness. The objections to it are that it was first printed at Frankfurt in Germany as late as 1748, and is accompanied with annotations attributed to the learned John Locke, a most absurd supposition tending to cast a doubt upon the original document itself. The annotations never emanated from the philosophical mind of Locke. They were written by a zealous Mason, superstitiously credulous in the mysteries of the craft, or intending to impose upon the credulity of others. Locke was not a Mason, and if he had been, he would not have given countenance to the absurdities set forth in this manuscript. It would seem that the Frankfurt editor had heard of the learned John Locke, and in order to give greater respectability to the record, he singles him out as a proper person to write a commentary upon it, But not having sufficient knowledge of English characters to select a suitable person to be addressed by Locke on the occasion, he directs his letter enclosing the record and comments to the Right Honourable Earl of... And for fear of detection by what is technically called an alibi, he dates the letter without giving the place from whence it was written, May 6, 1696. The address continued to be thus printed in copies issued in England as late as 1764, when Dermot first published his Ahiman Raison. Since that period, some English editor, to rid the document of this awkward appearance, substituted for the blanks Thomas Pembroke. Hutchinson gives this amendment in 1772. Where he obtained the information is unknown. The parties concerned, however, were all defunct, and there were no means of detecting the fraud. But although the connecting of the name of John Locke in this affair is evidently a forgery, still, that does not destroy the validity of the record, which accords in every respect with Druidical Masonry. This paper is said to have been found in the desk of a deceased brother at Frankfurt, but how it came into his possession is not accounted for. If believed to be authentic, it would no doubt be highly prized by a superstitious Mason and preserved with great care. Everything at the time of its supposed discovery in 1696 relating to the origin and purport of Masonry was kept a profound secret, and this document went to expose both. It is therefore not a little surprising that the fraternity should ever have acknowledged its authenticity. The pride of antiquity seems in this case to have prevailed over discretion, for all Masonic writers claim it as genuine. The author of a work entitled Analyse Mécanique, speaking of this document, says, "We ought to value this piece the more because it is an historical monument of the dawn of the 15th century, a time when we marched through a vast wilderness. So the thirsty traveler, finding an unexpected fountain in the desert, rests and refreshes himself, and quits it only with painful regret. I shall give the whole of this curious document. In copying it, however, I have changed the ancient orthography to the present and corrected, according to the annotations, the errors it contains in respect to persons and places. The title of the paper is Certain Questions with Answers to the Same Concerning the Mystery of Masonry, written by King Henry VI and faithfully copied by me, John Leland Antiquarius, by command of His Highness. They are as follows. What mote it be? It is the knowledge of nature and the power of its various operations, particularly the skill of reckoning of weights and measures, of constructing dwellings and buildings of all kinds, and the true manner of forming all things for the use of man. Where did it begin? It began with the first men of the East, who were before the first men of the West, and coming westerly, it hath brought with it all comforts to the wild and comfortless. Who brought it to the West? The Phoenicians, who being great merchants, came first from the east into Phoenicia for the convenience of commerce, both east and west, by the Red and Mediterranean seas. How came it into England? Pythagoras, a Grecian, traveled to acquire knowledge in Egypt and Syria, and in every other land where the Phoenicians had planted masonry, and gaining admittance into all lodges of masons, he learned much, and returned and dwelt in Graecia Magna, growing and becoming mighty wise, and greatly renowned. Here he formed a great lodge at Crotona, and made many masons, some of whom travelled into France, and there made many more, from whence in process of time the art passed into England. Do masons discover their arts to others? Pythagoras, when he travelled to gain knowledge, was first made initiated and then taught. This course should rightly be applied to all others. Nevertheless, masons have always from time to time communicated to mankind such of their secrets as might be generally useful. They have kept back such only as might be hurtful if taught to improper persons, or such as would not be beneficial without the necessary teaching joined thereto in the lodge, or such as do bind the brethren more strongly by the profits and convenience accruing to the fraternity therefrom or transmission. What arts have the masons taught mankind? The arts of agriculture, astronomy, arithmetic, music, poetry, chemistry, government, and religion. It has been objected that the word chemistry was not in use in the time of Henry VI. Its appearance, however, in this document may be accounted for by supposing that the Frankfurt editor substituted it for alchemy. How does it happen that masons are better teachers than other men? They only have the art of finding new arts, which the first masons received from God, by which they discover what arts they please and the true way of teaching the same. What other men find out is only by chance, and therefore but of little value, I trow. What do the Masons conceal and hide? They conceal the art of finding new arts, and that for their own profit and praise. They conceal the art of keeping secrets, that so the world may hide nothing from them. They conceal the art of wonder-working and foretelling things to come, that so the same art may not be used by the wicked to a bad end. They also conceal the art of changing, the way of obtaining the faculty of abfé, the skill of becoming good and perfect without the aid of hope or fear, and the universal language of Masons. Will you teach me the same arts? You shall be taught if you be worthy and able to learn. Do all Masons know more than other men? Not so. They only have a right and opportunity to know more than other men, but many fail from want of capacity, and many more from want of industry, which is very necessary for gaining all knowledge. Are Masons better men than others? Some Masons are not so virtuous as some other men, but for the most part they are better than they would be if they were not Masons. Do Masons love one another mightily, as is said? Yea, verily, and that cannot be otherwise, for the better men are the more they love one another. Our celebrated annotator, says Hutchinson, has taken no notice of the Masons having the art of working miracles and foreseeing things to come. This circumstance alone renders it sufficiently evident that Locke was not the annotator, for such a bold assumption would not have escaped his observation and severe animadversion. The annotator was doubtless fearful of involving the craft in difficulty by touching upon this subject, although he might have cited the mysteries in support of the pretension. The universal language of Masons, so much vaunted of, extends no further than to a few words, signs, and grips by which they can communicate to each other that they are Masons and have been initiated into certain degrees. They may also learn a cipher that is given in the Royal Arch, but which not 1 in 1,000 takes the pains to acquire, and if obtained can be of no Masonic use, that is, to communicate any secrets of the craft. For Masons are prohibited from committing these to writing, printing, carving, or engraving. John Gillim. In a work entitled The Display of Heraldry by John Gillim, it is stated that the company of Masons, being otherwise termed Freemasons, of ancient standing and good reckoning, by means of affable and kind meetings, divers times did frequent this mutual assembly in the time of King Henry VI, in the 12th year of his reign, 1434. Elias Ashmole. Ashmole in his diary, page 15, says, "I was made a Freemason at Warrington in Lancashire, 16th of October, 1646. On March 10th, 1682, I received a summons to appear at a lodge to be held the next day at Mason's Hall in London. March 11th I accordingly attended, where I was the senior fellow among them, it being nearly 35 years since I had been admitted into the fraternity. We all dined at the Half Moon Tavern, where we partook of a sumptuous dinner at the expense of the newly accepted Mason." Laurie, in recording this anecdote, says, "This gentleman was the celebrated antiquary who founded the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford. His attachment to the fraternity is evident from his diligent inquiries into its origin and history, and his long and frequent attendance upon its meetings. Robert Platt, LL.D., keeper of the Ashmolean Museum, etc., says, in his Natural History of Staffordshire, 1686, that they have a custom in Staffordshire of admitting men into the society of Freemasons, that in the moorlands of this country seems to be of greater request than anywhere else, though I find the custom spread more or less all over the nation, for here I found persons of the most eminent quality that did not disdain to be of this fellowship. Nor indeed need they, were it of that antiquity and honour that is pretended in a large parchment volume they have among them, containing the history and rules of the craft of masonry, which is there deduced not only from sacred writ but profane story, etc. New regulations. According to a copy of the old constitutions, says Anderson, a general assembly and feast was held on St. John's Day, the 27th of December, 1663, when Henry Jermyn, Earl of St. Albans, was elected Grand Master, who appointed Sir John Denham his deputy, and Mr. afterwards Sir Christopher Wren and John Webb his wardens. At this assembly, the following regulations, among others, were made: that no person of what degree soever be made or accepted a Freemason, unless in a regular lodge, whereof one to be a master or warden in that limit or division where such lodge is kept, and another to be a craftsman in the trade of Freemasonry. This regulation shows clearly that the society was not confined to operatives. It shows also that it was at this time in a very disorderly condition. That for the future, the fraternity of Freemasons shall be regulated and governed by one Grand Master, and as many wardens as the society shall think fit to appoint at every annual General Assembly. It appears by this that, at the period here spoken of, whatever may have been the case formerly, the Freemasons had no Grand Master, and that each lodge regulated its own affairs, that no person shall be accepted unless he be 21 years old or more. It is evident that this regulation was an innovation, and that previously apprentices were entered at the usual age in which they are taken in other trades. Sir Christopher Wren, says Anderson, was chosen Grand Master in 1698. He then enumerates the public buildings that were erected by Freemasons under his superintendence, and adds, some few years after this, Sir Christopher neglected the office of Grand Master, yet the old lodge near St. Paul's and a few others continued their stated meetings. Previously to this period, the government enacted the building of 50 new churches in the suburbs of London to supply the places of those consumed at the Great Fire in London in 1666, and Sir Christopher Wren, an eminent architect, was appointed one of the commissioners to superintend the construction of these edifices. It is highly probable that Wren was at this time master or president of the Company of Operative Masons of London, and may perhaps have been a member of the Freemason Society, but that the latter as a body was employed to construct public works is not probable. It was not acknowledged by the government as a company of architects, and whatever may have been its standing in the time of the Druids, it was at this period in little repute. Anderson gives the following account of the revolution of the order which took place at this period. In 1716, the few lodges in London, finding themselves neglected by Sir Christopher Wren, thought fit to cement under a Grand Master as the centre of union and harmony. It here appears that the order made in 1663 in regard to a Grand Master had become neglected. These lodges were those that met, 1. At the Goose and Gridiron Alehouse in St. Paul's Churchyard, 2. At the Crown Alehouse in Parker's Lane, 3. At the Apple Tree Tavern in Charles Street, Covent Garden, 4. At the Rummer and Grapes Tavern in Channel Row, Westminster. The members of these lodges and some old brothers met at the said Apple Tree, and having put into the chair the oldest Master Mason, they constituted themselves a Grand Lodge pro tempore in due form, and forthwith revived the quarterly communication of the officers of lodges, called the Grand Lodge, and resolved to hold the annual assembly and feast, and then to choose a Grand Master from among themselves, till they should have the honour of a noble brother at their head. Accordingly, on St. John Baptist's Day, the 24th of June, the summer solstice, 1717, the assembly and feast of the free and accepted Masons was held at the aforesaid Goose and Gridiron Alehouse. The Freemasons at this time seem to have rummaged their old records and found out what the society formerly was, and come to a determination to revive old Druidical Hiram Masonry. At this assembly, Mr. Anthony Sayre, gentleman, was elected Grand Master of Masons, who, being forthwith invested with the badges of office and power, and installed, was duly congratulated by the Assembly, who paid him the homage. Captain Joseph Elliot and Mr. Jacob Lamble, carpenter, were appointed Grand Wardens. The brethren did not wait long before a noble brother condescended to be placed at their head, for on the 24th of June, 1721, the Duke of Montague was elected and accepted the office of Grand Master of Masons. From that time to the present, a nobleman or a prince has constantly presided over the lodges of England. The society soon became fashionable. The brilliant processions and luxurious feasts now got up, which had for a long time been neglected, added to the sublime mysteries and secrets held out to the initiated, allured the young, the gay, and the inquisitive, to the standard of the order, which now assumed such an imposing appearance as caused it to spread, with astonishing rapidity, over Europe, Asia, and America. The year 1717 forms an important epoch in the history of Freemasonry. It had till then been for some centuries, almost exclusively, in the hands of mere craftsmen who knew not what to make of it. Druidism being extinct, the religious cement which had bound them together was dissolved, and the incorporated company of Masons, no doubt, rendered its combination in respect to that profession inefficient. As operative Masons, the incorporated company would naturally take the lead of a society not sanctioned by the laws, and the utility of whose mystic rites could not be estimated after the religion which gave them birth was no longer known. Dermot names 8 persons, among whom is the Reverend Dr. Desaguliers, who was elected Grand Master in 1719 as the authors of this remarkable revolution. At this revival, the ostensible ground upon which the society was originally founded, the craft of Masonry, as though in derision of the pretension, was utterly abandoned, and no longer considered as a recommendation for admission into the order. The society, however, keeps up a show of respect to the craft by marching in processions to lay the cornerstone of Masonic halls and other public edifices. This was an ancient religious custom having no reference to the art of building. Incorporation of Masons in London. Masons number 30. By the arms granted this society by William Hankestow, Clarencieux King at Arms in the year 1477. It appears to be of considerable antiquity. However, it was only incorporated by letters patent of the 29th of Charles II, September 17th, anno 1677, by the name of the Master, Wardens, Assistants, and Commonalty of the Company of Masons of the City of London. Kings at Arms are officers of great antiquity and anciently of great authority. They direct the heralds, preside at their chapters, and have the jurisdiction of armory. There are 3 in number: Garter, Norroy, and Clarencieux. They consist of a master, 2 wardens, 22 assistants, and 70 liverymen, whose fine of admission is £5. They have a small but convenient hall in Mason Alley, Basinghall Street. Their armorial ensigns are azure on a chevron between 3 castles argent, a pair of compasses somewhat extended of the first, crest, a castle of the second. This incorporation, of course, included the operatives of the Freemasons, who in their society make use of the same armorial bearings, which it is very probable originally belonged to them. To what period the pagan rites, under the name of Druidism, were sustained in different parts of Europe is uncertain. But that they were not concealed under the title of Freemasonry in any other quarter than Britain is evident from the charters of all lodges on the continents emanating from either the Grand Lodge of England or that of Scotland. The latter, however, was not instituted till 1736. The Grand Lodge of Ireland was formed in 1730, and in 1733 a charter for a lodge was obtained for Boston. So it is seen that America was not far behind in availing itself of the earliest opportunity to become a partaker in the advantages resulting from a knowledge of this wonderful secret. To suppose, as some writers have done, that the Freemason Society first sprang up in 1717, that such a mass of curious ceremonies bearing on their very front the most palpable marks of remote antiquity, was then for the first time concocted by doctors of divinity and other learned men, is to my mind preposterous. Freemasonry is based on Sabiism, the worship of the stars, but as before observed, its original intention has long since been lost sight of and abandoned. Modern Masons not only continue the ceremonies of ancient Masonry consisting of 7 degrees which relate exclusively to pagan rites, but have added thereto about 50 others. These are founded partly upon pagan mysteries and partly upon Jewish and Christian doctrines, forming altogether an incoherent medley of opposite principles. The partisans, however, of opposing sects seem to be reconciled to it, not stopping to inquire into the meaning of the symbols or willing to be deceived by the false explication given of them, congregate together in great harmony. And although the ceremonies relate wholly to religion, either pagan, Jewish, or Christian, discussion on the subject is absolutely prohibited in the lodge. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.